The Kryllan Empire had surveyed 9,000 star systems in the last 300 years, and in every single one, the pattern had held. Every species that reached the stars followed the same curve. Weapons that grew stronger slowly, hulls that thickened by degrees, fleets that expanded one ship at a time. Progress was supposed to be gradual, predictable, measurable. Humanity broke that pattern in a single scan. And in the seconds after that scan finished processing, 300 years of Kryllan certainty collapsed into a single, horrified question that would echo across the Empire within hours. How do you build something like this in 60 years? The Kryllan border cutter Talon's Reach had been tracking the human vessel for 11 minutes before anyone on the bridge realized something was wrong. Sub-Commander Vay Tarek watched the readout scroll across her console, expecting the usual profile, a mid-tier colonization species, probably still running on fission reactors. Definitely no threat to a Kryllan patrol ship twice its mass. Designation confirms Earth origin, her sensor officer reported. Vessel identifies itself as the ISV Aegis Fall, Human Registry. Fine, Vay said, only half paying attention. Log it, tag it, move on. We're not here to babysit primitives. She had heard about humanity in passing, a young species, recently contacted, still consolidating its home system. Nothing that warranted her attention. She'd seen 100 species at this stage of development, and they were never interesting until they'd had a few centuries to grow into something worth noticing. Then the deep scan results finished compiling, and her sensor officer went very quiet. Sub-Commander, he said, I need you to look at this. Humanity had joined the wider galaxy only 4 years earlier, following an unremarkable first contact with a minor trading consortium. The report that reached the consortium's records described Earth exactly as every young species was described. Promising, unthreatening, decades away from mattering. That assessment had never been corrected. No one had checked again. What no report mentioned, because no one outside Earth knew it, was what had happened in the years immediately before that first contact. A century earlier, a research vessel exploring the edge of human space had picked up faint, ancient transmissions from a dead system 3 light-years away. Whatever civilization had sent them was long gone. What remained were fragments of their final broadcasts, recorded in the last hours before their homeworld went silent forever, describing an enemy that had annihilated them in a war they never saw coming. Humanity had listened to those fragments exactly once. Then Earth's governments had made a decision that would shape the next century of human engineering. They would never again be a species caught unprepared. Aboard the Aegis Fall, Captain Idris Voss had grown used to the reaction his ship provoked, though it never stopped being satisfying to watch. He stood on the bridge as the Talon's Reach hailed them, its scan signature washing harmlessly over the Aegis Fall's hull, or so the Kryllan crew assumed. They're running a full military-grade scan, his tactical officer noted. Aggressive. They're not being subtle about it. Let them look, Voss said. There's nothing subtle about what they're going to find. The channel opened. Sub-Commander Vay Tarek's face appeared on the main screen, her expression carrying the practiced condescension of an officer who had delivered this exact greeting to 100 younger species before. Human vessel, this is Kryllan Border Authority. You're operating near contested territory. State your registry and purpose. ISV Aegis Fall, Human Survey and Defense Corvette, Voss replied evenly. We're conducting a routine border patrol of our own claimed space. No contested territory here, Sub-Commander. Just yours and ours, clearly marked. Vay's mouth tightened slightly. Your species has held interstellar capability for less than a decade. I'd advise some humility regarding territorial claims. Noted, Voss said, without a trace of humility in his voice. That was when the scan finished processing on Vay's console, and every assumption she'd walked onto the bridge with that day quietly died. So, Sub-Commander, her sensor officer said again, more urgently this time. The whole composition doesn't register as any known alloy class. It's absorbing our scanning frequencies instead of reflecting them. And the reactor output, he paused, checking the numbers twice. It's reading 9 times higher than a vessel this size should be capable of generating. Vay stared at the human captain's calm, unbothered face on her screen, and for the first time in her career she understood what it felt like to be the primitive one in the conversation. That corvette, her officer continued quietly, is small. 400 meters, maybe less. But if these numbers are accurate, it could disable this entire cutter without taking meaningful damage in return. That's not possible, Vay said, though her voice had lost its earlier certainty. A species 4 years into contact cannot possess this level of engineering. There would be evidence, warning signs, a development curve. There is no curve, the officer said. There's just this. Voss watched the shift happen across Vay's expression through the view screen. Confusion sliding into disbelief, disbelief sliding towards something closer to fear. He'd seen it before, on other bridges, from other officers, who'd made the same mistake of assuming a slow start meant a slow ceiling. Sub-Commander, he said, not unkindly, I'd recommend adjusting your assessment of our territorial claims." Faye didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice had lost its edge entirely. "How?" she said quietly. "How does a species build this in a handful of years?" Voss considered the question for a moment before answering honestly. "We didn't build it in a handful of years, Sub-Commander. We built it over 60. We just didn't tell anyone until we finished." Word of the encounter reached Kryllan Fleet Command within hours, and the reaction was immediate. A tactical assessment team demanded a full sensor package from the Talon's reach, convinced there had to be an error. Faulty equipment, a spoofed signature, something that would explain away numbers that made no sense against everything the Empire understood about technological progression. There was no error. The numbers held under every level of scrutiny the Empire's best analysts could throw at them. Fleet Admiral Corus Vale, who had spent 40 years building the Kryllan Empire's reputation as the dominant power along its stretch of the Galactic Rim, read the report twice in his private chambers before summoning his war council. "Explain this to me," he said when his senior officers had assembled around the projection table, the Aegis Falls scan data hanging in the air between them. A species barely out of its cradle has hull density readings that exceed our own Dreadnought-class armor, reactor output that shouldn't be theoretically possible at their parent tech level, and not one warning sign in 4 years of contact. His chief intelligence officer, a wary Kryllan named Tessic Bourne, stepped forward. "Admiral, we've reviewed everything available on humanity since first contact. Every report describes the same thing, a young, unremarkable species, still consolidating a single home system. Nothing in the record suggested this was coming." "Then the record is incomplete," Vale said flatly. "Someone missed something. Find out what." It took Tessic's team 3 days to piece together the fragments, and when they finally understood what they were looking at, the picture that emerged unsettled even the Kryllan Empire's most seasoned analysts. Humanity hadn't grown into this capability gradually, the way every other species the Empire had ever surveyed. They had built it deliberately, in near total secrecy, over 6 decades, ever since a research team had stumbled onto the dying broadcasts of an annihilated civilization and made a collective decision that they would never again be caught defenseless by something they hadn't seen coming. Every ounce of human engineering since that discovery had been quietly bent toward a single purpose, making sure that when humanity finally stepped into the wider galaxy, no one, friendly or otherwise, would be able to threaten them without paying an unacceptable price for trying. They weren't hiding this because they were weak, Tessic said, presenting the findings to the War Council. They were hiding it because they understood something about the galaxy the rest of us take for granted, that showing your full strength before you understand who you're dealing with is how young species get destroyed. Admiral Vale absorbed this in silence for a long moment. "And now they've shown a Kryllan patrol officer exactly what they're capable of." "Only a fraction of it, Admiral," Tessic said carefully. "Our analysis suggests the Aegis Fall is a corvette-class vessel, one of their smaller ships. If their fleet includes anything larger built on the same principles, we have no reliable estimate of what the capability looks like." The silence that followed lasted almost a full minute. "Recommendation," Vale said finally. "Do not test them, Admiral," Tessic said. "Not with force, not with provocation, not even with the kind of routine border posturing we'd use on any other young species. Everything in this data suggests humanity built these ships specifically to make certain that testing them would be the last mistake anyone made." Vale studied the projection a while longer. The Aegis Falls silhouette, small and unremarkable next to the Empire's own dreadnoughts, and yet carrying numbers that made those dreadnoughts look fragile by comparison. "Then we don't test them," he said at last. "We talk to them instead." 3 weeks later, Admiral Corus Vale requested a formal diplomatic channel with Earth's Unified Defense Council, the first time in Kryllan history that an admiral of his rank had personally initiated contact with a species barely out of its first decade of interstellar travel. Captain Idris Voss was present for the conversation, standing quietly at the edge of the meeting as human and Kryllan representatives spoke for the first time as something other than a routine border encounter. "I'll be direct, Admiral," said Director Amara Okafor, head of Earth's Council delegation. "We built what we built because we found evidence, a century ago, of a civilization that never saw its own destruction coming. We decided that would never be us. That decision wasn't about you, or the Kryllan Empire, or anyone we hadn't met yet. It was about making sure we'd still be here to have this conversation at all." Vale considered this carefully. "And now that we have met, Director, what happens to that decision?" Okafor's expression softened slightly. "It doesn't go away, Admiral. We'll always build for the worst case, but building for the worst case doesn't mean we're looking for a fight. We'd much rather spend the next century as neighbors than as a threat you spend sleepless nights worrying about." "That," Vale said, "would require considerable trust on both sides." "It would," Okafor agreed. "So let's start building it. Slowly, honestly, and without either of us pretending we don't understand exactly how dangerous the other one could be if we chose to be." Vale was quiet for a long moment, weighing 60 years of Kryllan military doctrine against the simple honesty of the proposal in front of him. Agreed, he said finally. Though I suspect, Director, that my empire will spend a great many years wondering exactly how far your restraint extends. Okafor allowed herself a small, knowing smile. Good, she said. That's exactly the point. Word of the encounter spread quietly across the galactic rim in the months that followed, not as a story of conquest or war, but as something rarer and, in its own way, far more unsettling to the empires who heard it. A species that had spent 60 years perfecting the art of never needing to fight, and had done it so quietly that an empire 3 centuries in the making hadn't noticed until it was already looking the result directly in the eye. The Kryllan Empire adjusted its border patrols after that. Quietly, without official announcement, human space stopped being treated as contested territory. And in briefing rooms across a dozen neighboring civilizations, a new phrase began circulating among officers assigned to monitor the edge of human territory. A warning passed quietly from commander to commander, the closest thing the galaxy had to an explanation for what had happened to the Talon's reach that day. Don't scan what you're not prepared to understand, because sometimes the answer isn't that a species is further behind than it looks. Sometimes it simply spent 60 years making sure you'd never find out how far ahead it truly was.